Senator John Whelan. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Cahill. And I too would like to welcome the Minister. And I do know him to be a fair-minded man and someone who takes interest in the debate here. And even at this late stage, I would like the Minister to hear us out in a meaningful way and to bring back our observations and concerns to the Cabinet, to the Taoiseach and to the Government, because it's not too late for a change of tact on what's happening here. I have to admit that the Senate is a stacked deck. It is a creature of the government of the day. And as it is currently structured and constituted, it is not probably fit for purpose. But there's not a single member in this House, or indeed anyone I've met in the general public discourse on this issue, who would say, retain the Seanad as it is. This is the 90th Senate, and any organisation which has been in existence that long would indeed be overdue for a reform, for a change, and that is all we're seeking, is an opportunity for that to be considered. And I think Senator Laura Osborne, who was perfectly correct, this was a whim. This was a flight of fancy in the heat of moment, in the heat of a battle of a general election, which was not thought out, which was not thought through. And Senator, if it might be so brazen as to suggest that not only is there no plan B, there was no plan A. No one knew what the game plan was at all. And the reason that is abundantly clear is, as you have said, and as other colleagues have said, the reasons that have been set out to suggest, to propagate the idea that the Seanad requires abolition outright, ring hollow and threadbare. In fact, I'm of the view, and I formed the view, when the Taoiseach was in here in the House last week, that his own heart is no longer in the idea. I'm an admirer of the Taoiseach. I believe him to be an honest and honourable man, which is why I'm appealing to him at this late stage even, to step back from this and to give us an opportunity to have such a referendum in due course. Because when he spoke to the House here last week, it was a fairly pedestrian preamble through the sections of the bill. It was not convincing, and the Taoiseach himself did not speak with any great conviction. And I say that as an observation, not a criticism, because I'm not even aware, I don't even think there's anyone around the Cabinet table any longer who believes that this was a good idea and it's an idea that should be followed through on at this juncture. For instance, if people are genuinely interested in reform, if this was a reform proposal, why not bring forward reform ideas? The government has it within its giving to reform the Seanad. No one else has. And indeed, in terms of Plan A and Plan B, is the government going to ignore the will of the people if the public decide to oppose the referendum and to vote for the retention of the Seanad? Are we expected to believe that the government will ignore that decision and not then proceed to reform the Seanad? How absurd would that be? Or perhaps maybe we'll have a second Seanad referendum until they get the result they want. And I'd like to bring the Minister's attention to an opportunity that this government, and indeed governments over the past 30 years have had. This is the 32nd amendment to the Constitution, even though I believe it's a monstrous one in that it's going to set about really vandalising and dismantling so many sections of the Constitution. But the 7th Amendment to the Constitution in 1979 sanctioned and authorised the government to extend the votes within the Seanad election process to universities across the country, and not just the select few who have them. But not a single Taoiseach or Cabinet or government since 1979 has saw fit to abide by the will of the people, to follow through on the mandate and instruction that were given by the people in that referendum. So what's the purpose or point in having a referendum if you're going to ignore it? Also, I think it is not right that the government and the Taoiseach continue to ignore that we have a vacancy here in the Senate. That vacancy should be filled if there's to be any respect for the democratic process at all. For years growing up, and over the last 20 years, a whole range of politicians non-stop going on about the diaspora and about immigrants. Perhaps the Taoiseach would like to take the opportunity to fill the vacancy on the Seanad with a representative of the emigrant community, someone who has experienced having to emigrate. 300,000 of our citizens have had, in my opinion, been forced to emigrate in the last 5 years alone. Would it not be a good idea to fill the vacancy with someone who could speak on their behalf or represent their perspective? There's still 400,000 people plus unemployed in this country. Would it not be an option for the Taoiseach to nominate someone who is unemployed or who could represent the interests and perspective and the life experience of the unemployed to that vacancy? Would that not be a worthy perspective to embed in the Seanad so as we could take it into account in our legislative process? Or a third option, we are going to have an Oireachtas banking inquiry. And I support that, and not before its time. But again, perhaps there's an opportunity there to fill the vacancy, perhaps with someone who's got judicial or legal expertise, who might head up that inquiry in an independent fashion on behalf of the Oireachtas. So there's all sorts of options and all sorts of opportunity, really, for reform if the Taoiseach and the government were minded to. But I don't believe they are. They've bought into this idea on a knee-jerk reaction, and now they're sort of stuck with it, and they don't know how to get out of it. And as Senator Morocco has pointed out, would you look at the reasons that were set out? The government had 2 years to think this through, 2 years to launch this bill. And when they did, they've come up with the proposal to have a hasty referendum in the autumn, and I'd like to ask you, Minister, as to when is the date of the referendum. I think as senators and the public we're entitled to know that. Are we going to come back? Are we going to come back here in September and be given 3 weeks' notice and ambushed in that fashion? I think that would be again a poor judgment and a poor thing to do. So I think that there is no benefit or purpose, in my view. I think the government should take Senator Fergal Quinn's reasoned amendment and adjourn the process so that it can be debated and considered further in September, and that the referendum could duly take place perfectly well, Cathaoirleach, next year, next May, in tandem with the local and European elections, and be discussed in the round as part of a reform package. And that would have a number of benefits. It would lead to further consultation, further public discourse, and it would save the government 20 million in a costly referendum in the autumn. Even if it's carried, the Senate will still sit until the time of the next general election. So there's no benefit in front-loading this autumn referendum. Also, on the issue of costs, I want to put on the record accurately that the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission, in their annual report, have confirmed that the direct cost of the Seanad is 8.8 million annually, which is a lot of money. But it's not the 20 million and 30 million that was unfairly, in my opinion, bandied about by the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach when they set this in motion. There is also, I think, the unfair characterisation of the Seanad as being elitist. I mean, it's easy to throw out that word and not follow through and not follow up with what you mean by that. Like, is it the chandeliers? Maybe if we change them to the fluorescence and sort of, you know, get some more gaudy curtains than the nice drapes that are there, would people feel? No, but would people feel more comfortable? Would it be a less elite? Because, you know, I mean, for the record, I mean, I was elected to the Seanad from the Dole queue. I come from 1266 St. Evans Park in Monasterevin, a council housing estate. Like, everyone has their own story, and the Seanad is, in my opinion, has a great diversity of representation, and that's one of its richnesses. That it does represent and reflect a broad cross-section of Irish life, and different interests and different perspectives and different vocational values and expertise. The Taoiseach somehow or other tried to rubbish what he's referred to as a 1930s vocational value system. Well, I think there's nothing wrong with that. We don't need less expertise. I actually learn in here from the people who contribute according to their own life experience and their own expertise. as Senator McAneill has pointed out, I think people would be better off perhaps sticking to the channel in terms of, rather than contributing on everything, but perhaps staying within the remit of their own expertise and area of expertise. The other thing is that the idea that the Seanad is not elected and has no mandate, that's not true. For 30 years as a journalist, I worked covering council meetings, week in, week out. And it's become fashionable to sort of, to disparage the role of county councillors. But county councillors are the building blocks of our democratic process and our democratic model. They actually are judged harshly by their own peers, their own neighbours in their own communities, in their own towns and villages and townslands. And they have to get over 1,000 votes and more in their own community. And they in turn then have a mandate to elect a certain number of the Senate seats. And I see that as a mandate by proxy. This idea that people somehow or other mushroom up overnight and find themselves in the Senate is not true. And the same applies to the various panels, and the same applies to the university panels. You have to go before your peers for judgment. So this idea that it's elite is wrong. Also, Cathaoirleach, the Taoiseach has taken no account whatsoever of the 110 nominating bodies who take part in the process of putting people forward to contest the Seanad elections. People like the IFA, IBEC, Chambers Ireland, the trade unions, the Exporters Association. Are we now to take it that they're elitist? Has anyone even consulted with them about this process? That is why I implore your Minister to take back to government the need to put back this referendum. Why the indecent haste? And finally, Cathaoirleach, to say, in my opinion, it will be a poor reflection, and I certainly would not like to have it on my political CV. I would not like to have it to be part of a government who marked and celebrated the centenary of 1916 by dismantling a key component of our democracy by abolishing the Seanad. And that's how it would be marked in 2016. It's a short-sighted move, and it needs to be considered, and it needs to go back to the Constitutional Convention. And again, Minister, I implore you to put a stop to this, because what we need is more accountability, more transparency, more expertise, more discourse, not less.
Margaret, Senator Cullinane.